What's up, guys? How we doing today? It's Friday, October 9th, I believe. 2020 just buzzing along, isn't it? This album is by Arnett Cobb, number 7216. It's called Moving Right Along, which seemed like a great segue to our episode yesterday. We're now on part 2 of Prestige in 1961. And I want to remind people there's also a new jazz sequence happening at the same time, simultaneously. A lot fewer titles, more edgier titles, but including the body of work at Prestige, like Riverside, it's just massive. Prestige is also doing Swingville and Moodsville titles at the same point, and those guys are going to generally be swing era cast, but not always. But they're going to play the blues and they're going to play ballads in a very smooth context for the consumer to enjoy. I love Swingville and I love Moodsville. They're both great. The Coleman Hawkins, the Red Garland, the Lockjaw Davis, Arnett Cobbs. There's a lot of great stuff on those sequences, and I'll show you those at some point separately. But Arnett Cobb, again, we saw a couple of his records yesterday. Texas Tenorman, very much in the Illinois Jacquette school. The Texas Tenorman often played with a bigger, thicker reed, which gave him a thicker, heavier tone. And a lot of casts kind of followed that, especially the Texas Tenorman. Arnett's the guy that's very much soul barbecue blues guy. And there's definitely a number of house cats. They're getting a lot of records at Prestige when they're there. Willis Jackson, Arnett Cobb, Gene Ammons, Lockjaw. They're getting a lot of titles. Shirley Scott. And in this sequence alone, they're all going to have 2 or 3 records in 1961. So it's a pretty prolific output a lot of these guys are doing. Johnny Hammond Smith is another record by him, 7217. Again, he's a great organ player. The title Hammond was to separate him from Johnny Smith, the guitar player, over at Roost, who was prolific in his own way. I'm a big Johnny Smith, the guitar player, fan as well. Another great record. It's a stereo copy, and the stereo Prestige with that silver and black are actually a lot tougher to come by than the old mono yellow and black titles. You just don't see them. They just probably didn't make nearly as many. Kind of a cool cover. Prestige's art department's not on par with Blue Note, and it's probably not even on par with Riverside's art department, which is a little bit more hit and miss than Blue Note's is. Blue Note doesn't really make mistakes art department wise. Not until Reed Miles leaves and they sell the record label to Liberty, then it goes to hell. But during the classic run of the Blue Note label, their art department is just on point. And Blue Notes is probably the best. Sad Boys is probably the worst. And all the rest of the labels from that era kind of fit somewhere in the range in between those two labels. This is a great label, a great cover, 7218. Again, another great Jimmy Forrest record. We've talked about quite a lot as of late. I'm a big fan of Jimmy Forrest. This one says it's a status copy, but the record itself is not a status, which is interesting. So whether it was a match made by a record store owner at some point, which is possible, I'm not sure. But it's definitely a little Prestige copy. My jacket fell, which sucks because it's a nice jacket. A couple things I do want to mention real quick here. If you are interested in purchasing titles from my videos, almost always I will put a link at the bottom of the video for merchandise, for Patreon pledging, and then usually I'll put an Amazon link, and you can click on that link and you don't have to buy the particular item. As long as you go there through that link, I'll get a small percentage of what you spend on Amazon that day. So it'd be appreciated if you guys, when you do purchase stuff I'm talking about, see what Amazon's got. Go through that link at the bottom of the description of my video, and like I said, you can buy a blender. If you went there through the link I post, and it could be any link from any of my videos. They stay live, so that's something just to keep in mind. You know, it just throws a little bit of revenue my way. I hate to do this, but Patreon, we could use a few new pledges there. $5 a month, that's all it would take. You'll have access to the Jazz Journal, which I just put out episode volume 3. Some great guest contributors, some great art, and some great little stories in there. Some very experienced people telling their side of the jazz world. So I encourage people to check out Patreon, check out the Jazz Journal, pledge as little as $5 a month just to help me and my family out if you can. And then of course the merchandise is at Teespring, also links to that. And get yourself a sharp looking t-shirt or hoodie and help support the channel and my family. But Forrest is a great player. Not enough credit and attention is thrown at his way, which is unfortunate. I remember finding this in Wisconsin. I found this in Madison while my kids and wife sat in the car waiting for me. That's always a fun shot when you know they're all sitting out in the car looking at their phones. I go fast, and it's an hour, and it feels like 20 minutes, and to them it feels like 2 hours. Hugh Lawson, Tommy Potter, and Clarendon Johnson round out this session. Kind of anonymous. And that's the thing about a lot of the Prestige records, their sidemen are far less known by this time frame. Number 7219, another fantastic Lockjaw record. This is Cookbook Volume 3. And like I was saying the other day, here we are, middle of 1961, and this is stuff from 1958. So it's just not this precise machine like Blue Note is, where everything's going to be representative of that time and moment and space. The Prestige stuff from release to release really jumps around a lot chronologically. And it's not to say a lot of it isn't worthwhile being issued. Of course it is. Again, the Cookbook series with Shirley Scott is fantastic. Heavy blues-driven, groove-driven storytelling, which is, to me, again, what jazz is about. And one of the clearest ways to define that is a story being told, and it can be by numerous storytellers, but they each give each other a chance to speak and listen while the other one's talking. And then they validate and cross-reference what the other storyteller's telling you by giving you the same story and giving you additions and color and commentary, but it's not conflicting, and it's certainly not telling you at the same time over top of the other speaker. You know, when you have 3-4 speakers speaking at the same time, it's hard for the human ear to straighten that out, to be able to deduct the feelings and the emotions and the where it's coming from, where it's being centered. There's 4 guys talking right now at the same time simultaneously. In this, there's a sax player giving you some of that preacher gospel black church, and the rest of the band and the organ is kind of being the choir, echoing and confirming what the Reverend's saying. But it's easy for us to follow and feel what's the proceedings. Jack McDuff, 7220. Again, there's that 7200 logo that they used for a little while. I like that little box. Great cover. Smoking was a big part of culture at that point, unmistakably so. You can't make a TV show about 1950s and 60s without having everybody smoking. McDuff's run at Prestige is pretty incredible. A lot of great stuff. Here's Miles Davis, The Beginnings, 7221. And there's been many a collector in a record store seeing this and going, oh, look, it's an old Miles Davis record. This is great. But if you don't know your history and your knowledge and your labels and your chronology, you won't realize he's long gone from Prestige at this point. And if you own the Musings of Miles, which is an early 7000 sequence LP, that even itself might have been a reissue of a 10-inch session. I can't recall. I think it's from 54. So it probably had an earlier edition of that. But this is just the reissuing of that. Again, from 55. So it's probably initially a 12-inch. But 7221, it's a Miles Davis record you don't need to have. It's an affordable way of getting the music of Miles. But even a lot of record store guys aren't detail-oriented to the point where they go, oh, this is just another version of that. And so you can see this in a record store for $80, $100. I think you're getting an old prestige Miles Davis session, and you're really getting a second rehashed version of it. Great group. Red Garland, Oscar Pettiford, and Philly Joe Jones. I love the cover of Music of Miles. It's just him there. Again, recorded in 54, 55. So Prestige is very unconscionable in some ways in terms of how they present music. King Curtis, 7222. He comes into the fold here. Another Texas tenorman. More baked beans and blues, baby. You know, Curtis is a great storyteller. Curtis has some Louis Jordan R&B type edges to him, but of course he's still got the Texas tenor, Jack Kett, Arnett, Cobb, Buddy Tate vibe going a lot of the time. I think a lot of what King Curtis's sound is determined by his group and his label. His stuff at ACO and some of his other labels is much more R&B influenced and straightforward. And this record here, Soul Meeting, and he has another one with Oliver Nelson at this point too. It's pretty straightforward blues, actually, straightforward jazz. This has got King Curtis, Little Brother on the cornet, Wynton Kelly on the piano, Sam Jones and Belton Evans on the drums. And Little Brother is, of course, a reference to Nat Adderley, who we're hearing right now. It's a great little record, and it's actually a pretty tough one to come by, 7222. And I'm a big fan of Nat and a huge fan of King Curtis. This is the aforementioned one with Oliver Nelson. This is towards the end of Oliver Nelson's making records with him as a player. You know, he probably will continue to play, but he becomes very much by 61, 62 driven by arranging and setting up producing sessions, and he makes a lot of sessions at Verve and at Impulse as an arranger, producer, assistant to those labels, and much fewer of him as just a player. And he still does some of the playing, you know, at times, but he certainly broadens out his scope. This is a great record. They call it Soul Battle, and it's got Oliver Nelson, King Curtis, and Jimmy Forrest. And the three of them are just kind of battling it out, playing the blues, playing jazz. And this one might also have Roy Haynes on the drums. This one might actually have a new jazz version, I can't recall. A lot of Oliver Nelson stuff gets that duality. 7225. There's one missing here, 7224. If I recall, I think it's a Milt Jackson album that is also issued earlier in the 70s, but I never bothered to pick up that reissue. If I found one in the store cheap enough, I'd probably grab it just to have it, but I don't have it. But I don't consider that missing a title when I have the original release from 55. And the Milt Jackson actually definitely had a 10-inch version of 51 or 52. So you'll see Prestige have no problems issuing the same title 3 different ways. And unlike a lot of the labels that will make it clear that this is just a reissue of some earlier work, Weinstock will often leave that very obtuse. So you don't realize that oh shoot, I already have this. This is an interesting record, actually. Afro-American sketches, some heavy arranged parts that you can hear, and that's the hallmark of where Nelson's going. His orchestras and his big productions start to become the norm for him. Huge group here, big trombone section, big trumpet section. We got some French horns, 3 of them, a whole bunch of sax players, flute players, tuba. It's pretty massive, the group. Looks like 20 guys maybe. Recorded in March of 61, in November of 61 as well. There's conflicting dates there. That's weird. But great Oliver Nelson stuff. Interesting, complex soundscapes. And Oliver Nelson dies a little bit younger than I'm sure most collectors would like. It would have been interesting to hear where he would have gone into the 70s. I feel like he probably would have made a bigger impact in Hollywood because he was definitely starting to go that direction. And Oliver Nelson's a guy whose records have actually become quite collectible and fairly expensive. Shirley Scott, the great organ player, 7226. Again, her discography is prolific. Like I said, I got 20 records by her. Here we are, 7227. Here's another Arnett Cobb already, Sizzlin. For my money, that's probably one of the worst Prestige album covers. Just don't like it in any way. The color choices, the pencil drawing, everything about it looks kind of thrown together and budget label-esque, which I never am a fan of. Another Jack McDuff and Gene Ammons. More gut bucket blues storytelling right there. Fantastic stuff. 7228. This was recorded actually in 62. So we're starting to cross over into that next year in terms of recording dates and releases, but there's still a lot of stuff that was recorded in 61 that was released in early 62. So I'm going to continue showing you a few more titles here. I read Garland Quintet with John Coltrane. This has a different album cover actually. Initially had a black cover with a red kind of symbol on it. But this reissue was called Dig It, 7229, recorded in 58 with Coltrane, Donald Byrd, George Joyner, Arthur Taylor, and Paul Chambers. So again, a beginner might think, oh, look at how Prestige has all these great musicians in their roster for decades. And that's definitely far from the case. Honey Gordon sings 7330. This record had an interesting story. I tracked it down once, got lost in the mail, never made it to me. I found another copy eventually at a decent price. And it's a little noisier than I would like it to be, but that's part of history. You know, you dig out the old treasures, and not everything in a museum is going to be flawless. But it doesn't mean you still can't learn a lot about ancient Egypt from a slightly flawed sarcophagus. You know, you can still learn a lot about a culture from a piece of pottery that's not perfect. A mosaic doesn't have to have every tile in place for you to understand what the story was being told there. And so, to me, getting a record that's flawed, imperfect, there's a line to be drawn, and each person needs to determine that for themselves. But I can still glean a lot of history and understanding about an artist, about a musician, about what was influencing them, what kind of singer were they? Were they glitzy and poppy and show-tuney? Or were they bluesy and soulful? Were they gospel? Were they rigid? Were they loose? Was there a lot of inflection? Did they have a lot of vibrato? Or were they very straight and clean? There's a lot you can still learn. And like I said, it's just got a little bit of snap, crackle, pop in the background there, which honestly, for the most part, I don't even hear it. When I'm listening, doing my stuff, that stuff to me often just sounds like a fire crackling in the corner. So I'm playing a vinyl record and there's a little fire going. It's warm. I don't find it annoying. A skip I find annoying, but a little snap, crackle, pop is almost endearing. And to me it reminds me of the archaeological nature to my digging. You know, I'm learning here, and a textbook doesn't have to be perfect for me to learn. But again, a lot of people obviously aren't into it for that aspect. They're not trying to grasp the history and the feeling and the social cultural significance of what's happening. They just want to kind of hear their speaker system and be like, listen to how posh I am. Darling, I'm magnificent. Pass me my caviar. My speakers cost $10,000. Oh my God, this record has a small warp in the corner of the jacket. I must return it. I can't ever buy one of those tone poets again. There was a split in the... Come on. The tone poet did a great job. Gave you a record for a good price. Of course, that gatefold's going to have a little split sometimes where the record sits in there. Who cares? my mind is boggled by it. And I think you're probably going, well, I need to resell this someday. Well, that's not exactly how my mind operates. This is the great Frank West. And I'm a huge Frank West guy. He was a staple of the Basie bands for a long time. A great multi-instrumentalist. He played the flutes. He played almost all the reed instruments. His work with Basie is fairly impressive. His Savoy sides are great, and they're actually a great value. You can get those Savoy tracks for a pretty good price. But even those are kind of, I've seen those go up in the last 5 years. Oliver Nelson's on this, Albert Aarons, George Barrows, Tommy Flanagan, O.C. Johnson, Ray Barretto. Southern Comfort, 7231. Recorded in 62. So again, I'm kind of overlapping here a little bit, but there's still some stuff from 61 coming here. Great record, tough to find, but not super expensive. This is Willis Jackson's next record, also from 62, 7232. A great soulful player, as I've mentioned before. John Wright makes another record here, 7233, Mr. Soul. Again from early 62. Soul Summit, Gene Ammons and Sonny Stitt with Jack McDuff. Again, that's as barbecue blues as it gets right there. Wonderful stuff. And what you're seeing here is a lot of those prestige house cats getting a lot of releases. Jimmy Forrest, Sit Down and Relax with Jimmy Forrest. This one was recorded in 61. Oliver Nelson main stem with Joe Newman. Newman was also a Basie player, a great trumpet player, beautiful storyteller, very lyrical. One of the most unheralded guys in today's collector's minds is Joe Newman. He really slips through the cracks, and you can get Joe Newman titles that are just killer. No one's talking about it. This is from 61 as well. Both kind of interesting black and white covers there. I don't know what that big white circle even is. It doesn't look like it's a light. It's hard to understand sometimes the art choices that Prestige makes. 7237, Larry Young, Groove Street. Another young organ player showing up on the scene. His early work here is fairly contemporary, fairly middle of the road compared to where his work's going to go once he gets the Blue Note in the late 60s. He really starts to have some pretty avant-garde recordings. And Larry Young's records are some of the most collectible organ jazz records out there, just because I guess he was very much interesting composer and had a lot of edges to what he was doing. Some of those late Blue Notes a couple of them are actually kind of a tough listen. But he's a great cat, great cover. One of my favorites from this era, 7237. And now we've moved on to that logo, the little swirly Prestige logo, which I like. Looks like a kind of a turntable almost, but cool album cover, cool record, a lot of blues in that. And then we're just going to wrap this up real quick here. Gene Ammons, Twisting the Jug with Joe Newman and Jack McDuff. So there's another setting of Joe Newman, and it's a great way to get to know Joe Newman, is buying some of these Prestige records from this era and hearing this cat play. Oddly enough, he doesn't get much as a leader. I think he has one or two on the Moodsville, Swingsville series, but I don't think he gets anything as a leader on the 7000 series, which I think is strange. Johnny Hammond Smith and Willis Jackson, Cooks with Gator Tail. Another awful album cover. It's just yellow and red font with a white border with a black center. This would be better if I could make up a story and be like, the original album cover had naked women drinking wine and they were giving birth to angels. It was a really cool cover, but as far as I know, that was always what the cover was. Just a black square with some boring font, and it's amazing how Reed Miles does stuff with shape, color, and design. It makes it look so timeless and so minimal and modern. And this looks like a third grader, had some cardboard paper and did a cutout and made a go of it. Shirley Scott plays Horace Silver 7240, also recorded in 61. It's interesting hearing her play Horace Silver's stuff with Henry Grimes on the bass and Otis Finch on the drums. And again, the Prestige black and silver stereo, which you start seeing a lot more of that in 61. That stereo Prestige album, you didn't see a lot of that up until this point. And even in the 60, 61, 62 era, the black and yellow are still much more common than the stereos, but they start to become much more prevalent once we get into the mid-60s. So that wraps up kind of where Prestige was in 61 in terms of the 7000 label. I'm going to throw a few more things at you real quick here. The new jazz sequence is starting to thin out its ranks. And whether it's Weinstock kind of having enough of it or the funding and the sales just not being there, new jazz doesn't have many legs left to stand on. In 61, there's still a few really great titles, including this Eric Dolphy record, well, Ron Carter record, with Eric Dolphy and Mal Waldron. This is Ron Carter's first record as a leader. He's been on the scene for a few years already, but he's a young cat here, obviously. This is a Japanese pressing of this. George Duvivier's on this, Charlie Persip's on the drums. It's an interesting record. Dolphy plays a lot of baritone, bass clarinet, which is an interesting sound. It's a tough record to come by, which is why I have a Japanese version of it. And new jazz goes to this look now at this point, with the kind of bar across the bottom of the photograph, and they kind of look a little dated. Mal Waldron, The Quest. This is also with Eric Dolphy and Booker Ervin. A fantastic session. 8269, 8265. This is Yusef Lateef Into Something, 8272. Pretty heavily water damaged cover, but it's an original vinyl, and the vinyl is in pretty good shape actually. Also on new jazz, a guy by the name of Roland Alexander. So you can see the kind of continued look of these albums with that bar on the bottom, a little bit of color, a photograph, and we're going to call it a day. This is a great record. Curtis Fuller and Red Garland. This is also an original new jazz. And new jazz titles from this era are as expensive as anything else out there. You know, they didn't get huge distribution, it seems, and there wasn't a lot of reissues of a lot of the new jazz titles, making a lot of them very rare, very tough to come by. And this one is a great American old pressing that sounds pretty darn good, but even that wasn't cheap. Like they just aren't out there. And I remember for the new jazz sequence, I had to go to Japan and buy 4, 5, 6 of them at a time just to be able to track them down. They're that hard to come by. Eric Dolphy, Far Cry, comes out in this period, and this is a later Prestige reissue of that. As I said, Prestige would put stuff on both sequences. And then this is also a title that was on new jazz, Kenny Burrell and John Coltrane, 8276. I don't think this had a different cover. I think it always had this cover. But the recording on this is from 58. And so again, you're seeing stuff that probably could have been released in 58 on 7000 series. Could have released in 62, 61 on 7000, but here they put it on new jazz. It's hard to understand the thinking sometimes of Weinstock, but that's the nature of this business. You know, jazz was a very hit and miss enterprise. There wasn't a ton of money being made, in spite of how we perceive it today. These guys were taking great risk recording the black artists. They were out there promoting and professing their belief in what the black community was striving for and the integrity of their art, and recognizing these guys weren't just criminals and lesser than. They had important things to say, And even guys like Lubinsky and Weinstock and the Chess Brothers, as awful as their track record is, I think a lot of times it's governed more by greed than ultimate racism. And ultimately, greed drives a lot of racism. You know, economics factors in greatly into that divide. And I don't think necessarily they probably use the racism that existed institutionally as a justification for not having to pay you guys very well. But that's money and greed talking, not so much. It's using race as an excuse. And it probably, I don't think Weinstock was making hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, you know, and he had plenty of risk and capital at stake. And so that's part of the American business model. We still struggle with that today, is the balance between the worker and the boss, and where does the money go? And the American business model often has been, screw the worker, fuck them. I have my risk, my capital at stake here. It's my enterprise, I've built it. If I need to put the money into my pockets to pay my bills and keep my wife happy, I'll find a different employee. Fuck you, walk out, strike, see what happens. And it's so justified and so commonplace throughout American society to oppress the worker, especially if they have a different religious belief, different ethnicity, a different race. It just gives us this reason to offhandedly dismiss you and your demands. And most of America won't bat an eye at it. You know, it's sad, but again, I don't think Weinstock was an out and out racist. I just think he was governed by money. And race often becomes a factor for you to hold on to more of your money. Even today in the news, the constant barrage of immigrants are coming to take your job. They want to take your money. We use money and fear and minorities, and it's a sad state of affairs that we're still there as much as we are. But what it also tells us is the great legacy of guys like Alfred Lyon at Blue Note, Orrin Keepnews at Riverside, Norman Granz at Verve, the integrity and the honesty and the empathy that those guys placed in their black musicians and treated them like royalty, and defending their honor and refusing to sleep in hotels where the black cats couldn't stay. Like, Norman Granz can tell some stories that would just make our blood curdle. Most of us can't really even relate to it, you know. So it's such an important part of the music, and I don't think we can ever escape it. And so as awful as Weinstock is in a lot of ways, he still gave a lot of young black kids a lot of opportunities. And without any question, Prestige is a black jazz label. There's some white cats here more than at Blue Note, but it's dominated by black artists. And Weinstock's giving a lot of these guys an opportunity. And it's not like a lot of the cats Weinstock's assigning own entities that are going to guarantee to pay him big revenue. You know, the Weinstock had no guarantees that the Dolphys and Roland Alexanders and all these cats he's bringing in, that they're going to pay off. And a lot of those records didn't sell. A lot of those records sat in record stores and were ignored by the masses, and the black community might have loved a lot of it, but weren't big record buyers. So a lot of it hinged on the white consumer to catch on. And obviously labels like Bethlehem and Contemporary and Pacific were already catering to a white audience, very much from a white-centered consumer's perspective. And for a lot of white kids in America, just bringing home a record by a black musician wasn't necessarily going to be greeted with positive response. So for a lot of white kids, buying a white jazz record was safer, less condemning. And so a lot of great black artists don't get much opportunity to make a living. And so as hard as I am on Weinstock and Herman Lubinsky from Savoy and the Chess Brothers from Argo and Chess, Cadet, and those guys all have some awful stories being told about them, and none of the guys who recorded or played for him would probably throw him a life jacket if they fell off a raft. But at the same time, those guys did give a voice and an opportunity to these guys to record endless works. Just an incredible string of recordings. The prestige of all body of work is massive. It continues on for a long time. I'm going to do another episode here from 61, showing you what all the other labels were doing. We kind of covered Impulse, Prestige, Blue Note, and Riverside in very depth. I'm just going to skim over what everybody else was up to, move on. People seem to be enjoying those 2x2 series a lot. I got a throat grabbers coming up soon. Excuse me. I'm going to try to get that other 1961 done. I got some busy things going on this weekend, but appreciate you all. And again, if you haven't donated to Patreon, I could use the support. My family could really use the help. I don't want to make this about money, and I try not to bring it up very often, but we could definitely use a few more pledges right now. And if you don't want to pledge support, grab a hoodie, grab a t-shirt. I'll get a little bit of revenue from that. And remember, if you buy stuff from the episodes, try to link through one of my Amazon links, just so I can get a little revenue from that as well. Y'all be safe, y'all be blessed, have a great weekend. I'm going to wrap up 1961 probably tomorrow. I might air it Sunday, I'm not sure, but I gotta go. Peace.